Hello, Assalamualaikum. Welcome back to my video. Now we move to the last subtopic in chapter 2, which is the number 8, anaerobic respiration. There are other methods of ATP production that do not require oxygen, called anaerobic respiration or fermentation. Anaerobic respiration still use electron transport chain, but with a different final electron receptor. For example, the obligate anaerobe organism use sulfate as final electron receptor. Otherwise, it will die in the presence of oxygen. Another example is facultative anaerobe organism. It makes ATP with presence of oxygen and capable to switch to fermentation when there is no presence of oxygen. So anaerobic respiration begins with the glycolysis and produce the pyruvate as what you've learned during previous video, and the results is 2 ATP and 2 NADH per glucose. And there is a regeneration of NAD plus from NADH, which can be reused in glycolysis again. So anaerobic respiration consists of two types of fermentation, either alcohol fermentation or lactate fermentation. We will discuss on alcohol fermentation first. First, glucose will be converted into 2-pyruvate in glycolysis using the 10 steps that you've learned in previous video and produce 2 ATP and 2 NADH. Alright, then each 2-pyruvate will undergo the decarboxylation to produce 2-acetaldehyde and removal of 2 carbon dioxide. And finally, the 2-acetaldehyde is reduced by 2 NADH and produce 2 ethanol, and this allows the regeneration of 2 NAD plus to be used in glycolysis again. So the final product in alcohol fermentation is the ethanol that is commonly used for production of beer or wine, and yeast, which is example of unicellular fungi, use alcohol fermentation for production of bakery product. Or we use alcohol fermentation for production of local food, for example tempe, tapai and pudu. So the second fermentation is the lactic acid fermentation or lactate fermentation. So again, glucose is converted into 2-pyruvate via glycolysis, and there is production of 2 ATP and 2 NADH, but this time the pyruvate did not undergoing the decarboxylate. Instead, it is directly transformed into 2 lactate, and this again allow the regeneration of 2 NAD plus that we later use in glycolysis again. Alright, so lactic acid is the derivative of lactate that is commonly used in lactobacillus bacteria for production of cheese and yogurt. So the sour taste of yogurt derived from the lactic acid. And then in addition, human muscle cell also use this process when oxygen supply is running low, and most typically when we are doing intense activities such as prolonged running. So human muscle cell will switch to this process to allow production of quick ATP, and lactic acid that produced in human muscle cell will cause muscle to fatting. So to summarize, all forms of respiration that we have learned, either aerobic or anaerobic respiration, must begin with the glycolysis to produce pyruvate. And then there are 3 phases of pyruvate, either pyruvate undergoing the pyruvate oxidation, or it undergoing alcohol fermentation or lactic acid fermentation. Alright, so this is the comparison of aerobic and anaerobic respirations. So aerobic respiration again is a respiration that use oxygen, while anaerobic respiration is a respiration that do not requiring any oxygen. And cells involved for aerobic respiration is mostly cell, while anaerobic respiration occurs in bacteria, yeast, erythrocyte aka the RBC, and in muscle cell. In aerobic respiration, there is no lactic acid production, while there is production of lactic acid in anaerobic respiration in lactic acid fermentation. And then the energy produced in aerobic respiration is high, 30 to 32 ATP, while there is a low production of energy in anaerobic respiration, which is 2 ATP via glycolysis only. And then the products in aerobic respiration is carbon dioxide, water and ATP, while anaerobic respiration produce lactic acid and ATP in lactic acid fermentation, and ethanol, ATP, carbon dioxide in alcohol fermentation. And then reactants of aerobic respiration is oxygen and glucose, while anaerobic respiration only use glucose. And then site of reaction, aerobic respiration occurs in cytoplasm and mitochondria, while anaerobic respiration occurs in cytoplasm only. There are 4 stages involved or processes involved in aerobic respiration: the glycolysis, pyruvate oxidation, Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation, while anaerobic respiration only involves glycolysis and fermentation. For aerobic respiration, combustion of oxygen is complete, while anaerobic respiration, the combustion of oxygen is incomplete. So that's it for chapter 2. Thank you very much for your attention.